Slight echo, but that's okay. So hello everybody, welcome again. So we are going to get started with our discussion on today. And of course, just for our panelists who I'm sure already are aware, we are recording it today for our discussion pertaining to diversity and inclusion in the current, considering the current society, of course, and then also in light of the current pandemic as well. And so just want to send a big thank you to our panelists today who are here, going to give an opportunity for them to introduce themselves. But before we get started, my name is Isaac Lash Jr. I currently serve as a community director for the Housing Residence Life Department here at Mississippi State University. I also serve as chair for the Diversity and Inclusion Committee within the Mississippi Association of Housing Officers as well. So with that, again, today's discussion will be framed around in light of the pandemic and some of the racial injustices that we have seen just in light of everything going on and as it relates to our roles within housing residence life. But before we do that, we're going to allow our lovely panelists to introduce themselves. And I kind of have a working order, but at the same time, we can just kind of jump all in here. If you see like a 2-second pause, by all means, feel free to introduce yourselves. Also, as people are introducing themselves and as we have our discussion today, just a couple of ground rules. Just if people are able to mute their mics, just so to alleviate any background noise, that'd be great. And also, if you are comfortable and if it is suitable for you to share your screen, that is great. And if not, we still value seeing your name and seeing who you are. And so that works just as well. So kind of preference there for the panelists. So with that, we will jump into introductions. Whoever wants to get us started.
I can. It was like a weird, like, who's doing it? So yeah, my name is Ben Huff. I am currently a community coordinator with the Department of Student Housing at the University of Mississippi, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
I'm Meg Freeman. I'm currently a Residence Life Coordinator at the University of Southern Mississippi. I use she, her, hers pronouns.
Hi, my name is Billy Trahan. I'm a community director here at Mississippi State University, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
I think we got 2 more, whether that be Jillian or our other fam in the group, whoever would like to introduce themselves next.
I thought it was just the panelists. I'm Jillian. I am the community coordinator at the University of Mississippi as well. I'm sorry.
Honestly, same. I thought it was just the panelists introducing themselves. But hi, my name is Caitlin Bulldog. I'm a community coordinator at the University of Mississippi.
Yes, got you. And that is also a that is on me because the panelists did introduce themselves, and then I am also not recognizing that we have our lovely members of the MAHO committee as well here. So also great to see everybody. With that, and we just had another who just came on. So if you feel free, we just kind of, people are just introducing themselves. So if you'd like to just introduce yourself as you join in, fam.
Hi everyone, I'm April Bolton. I'm a coordinator at Texas State University.
Good deal. Thank you so much. And yep, so those are all of our panelists on today. Thank you so much again. Also, the committee, we also introduced ourselves, so even better. So with that, we will jump into today's discussion again in light of the COVID-19 pandemic that we all have been experiencing so far, and then also, of course, with the developments within society pertaining to racial injustices for many different groups and people of color, but specifically African-American members within the community as well. We want to try to talk about that today. And again, we've kind of set some ground rules pertaining to audio, but also just to remind people that this is a safe space, so a safe environment where sharing just your own thoughts and things of that nature, where we will respect those thoughts and insights as well that are offered. So just want to include that as well. So to get the discussion started, again, whoever wants to kind of jump in today, just wanted to see if we can talk a little bit about what are some of the ways, in light of everything that has been going on, what are some of the ways that you have begun to process and initiate advocacy for change in your department or at your institution, and what challenges have you faced, or do you kind of foresee in some of those things that you have looked at for wanting to change or for the department to reconsider, just in light of everything going on? And again, for our panelists, anybody can jump on in, and if I need to restate or rephrase the question, by all means, I can do so.
So I can start because this is a lot of what my summer collateral assignment has been with the department. And so different ways that we're advocating for change is restructuring the way that we're doing our diversity, equity, and inclusion training for our staff at all levels. Myself and an assistant director are tasked with making sure that each of the training committees is on message, and we're starting with a kind of like a policy and departmental climate review at the professional staff level. So that's engaging our associate director, assistant directors, community coordinators, everybody in that work, and then broadening it out a little bit as we go further and further down the chain. So for our grads, we're talking about a bias spectrum. How do you intervene on instances of implicit or explicit bias? How do you do those things? And our student staff, how do you engage in conversations? And so really taking it from a more narrow, fine-tuned structural way and branching it out to a more practical way is the way that we have found, or at least I don't know that it's going to be successful, but we are trying that this year because we are the University of Mississippi and we have a very troubled history that we do not shy away from. But we, I think, have a brighter future than our past. So,
thank you.
I think one of the first things that I found very challenging was I had to do a lot of self-reflection, because this is an area of privilege that I definitely have as a white cisgender man. I generally have a lot of that privilege, and being able to check myself at that privilege at the door so that I can be a better ally versus this idea of white saviorism. And so just making sure that I'm personifying voices of people who are not represented versus owning voices of people who I don't know the identities and life stories of. So really just checking and doing that self-reflection, checking my privilege, and making sure that I am doing things to help raise voices versus help mask them. And so that's something that I've been trying to do personally. And then making sure that we're implementing that, because I oversee training here for our housing professionals and our RAs and our RDs. So really just making sure that when we do our training sessions, we're lifting people up and making sure voices are being represented versus that ownership and that white saviorism. So really trying to toe that line, because sometimes it can be very blurry of what that looks like.
Yeah.
For USM, we definitely have a great relationship with police. However, we recognize that while we think we have a great relationship with police, on the professional and the housing side, our students may not always reflect the same feelings. So kind of looking at that and where we're potentially putting our students' mental and physical health at risk when we utilize our police, and maybe kind of stepping back and bringing in other entities, or seeing where we can kind of promote that separation. So in a quantifiable sense, we're no longer going to be using our police to help us with after hours visitation violations, because at the end of the day, we should be able to internally handle those. And that it's one of those, we shouldn't be putting our students' mental health at risk because they may have violated a policy, because we've all potentially violated a policy even if we didn't know about it. So their safety is more important. And so we're having those conversations about, we acknowledge diversity and all of that, and just because we have a diverse space doesn't mean that racism, transphobia, homophobia doesn't exist. And so having to go beyond just acknowledging and hiring diverse people, but making the culture itself able to have these conversations, which is not easy. We all have our different biases that are implicit in having people take implicit biases tests and acknowledge. One that I didn't even realize is I'm biased towards men. My dad died when I was young. I grew up with all women, so I tend to trust women more. And so it's one of those things that we have to acknowledge that. And if you don't know it, you're not going to be able to acknowledge it or see it. So having those conversations of, oh, this could be something I need to work on personally and professionally to support my students.
Yeah. Until, did you want to add to that, Gabrielle, or I wasn't sure before we moved on. Okay. Well, no, that I think that's really good, and I know we kind of very interested in starting the conversation, speaking to those ways in which we begin to process that change. Want to kind of segue. I think a lot of people were kind of touching on this idea of those personal reflection moments that I think all of us have encountered, whether that's in light of allyship or that in light of being, a members of the community, right? So myself standing as an African American and Caucasian male, being biracial, thinking about those personal reflections as some of you have mentioned, and so. With that, and thinking about some of your own personal reflections, but also looking at your fellow peers and colleagues, what have those observations looked like and just conversations look like in your respective departments surrounding the pandemic, and also more specifically though, surrounding a lot of the societal injustices that we've seen, and what have been some of the feedbacks to some of those some of that change that you all have just spoken to in our last question? So just thinking about those personal reflections and the conversations and observations that you have had with members in the department, and then thinking about the feedbacks that have been received when wanting to propose that change that we just talked about. And again, whoever wants to jump in from there.
Hi guys again. I can personally say the conversations have been a little tough. I come from a predominantly Black institution, and I think in light of everything that's going on, it's been a different emotions for everyone. I think it's a little bit of a generation barrier with us, because some of the ones that are on the more of the younger side, I see it's affecting a lot harder. But I think some of the ones who are on the older side of the spectrum, it's kind of like, I don't know, I think we entered an era where everything was everybody just needed everything to be okay and to just deal with whatever was going on. So that generation didn't necessarily have to get out here and protest. So I think it skipped the generation before us. And now the generation now is protesting. So the generation before us is kind of like, hey, it's none of our concern. We're just going to go back to our daily routine. But then you have the other generation who are like, no, we're going to fight this and we're going to be for it. So it's been kind of difficult. I can see a divide in the community as towards which generation wants to do what. You have some who are for it, want to go out there and let their voices be heard. But then we have some of the other ones that's like, well, just let the justice system handle everything that's going on. There's a pandemic going on. And as you can see, with so many protests and things going on, you see a lot of young people out there. And I think the older generation is kind of like, it's COVID, please stay in the house. But I think we see that need to fight, and that's what's going on. So I kind of see like a disconnect a little bit. We're not as connected as we should be, but I think that generation didn't have to do it for a while, and so now that it's coming back up, it's kind of like they're a little more reserved. So I have seen little reservation in the community.
Thank you. That's a good point.
We as professional staff, when we had the distinct honor and privilege of packing up rooms when students chose not to come get their items, we engaged in a conversation 6 feet apart about what normal looks like, how the juxtaposition between COVID-19 and the continued resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement positions normal as two different things. So we're desiring going back to like an economic or social normal, but we also want to dismantle what that normal has been for the Black community. And so that was a really interesting piece that we were talking about and looking at ways of accountability. So we have all of this data, and the university and the state is willing to share so much data about COVID-19 contraction rates, test rates, positive rates, all of that stuff. But I don't see very often, a police department sharing its stop statistics. We're not seeing arrest statistics. We're not seeing that. And so I think that in order for us to continue to move forward, I think that we have to, leaders have to lead. And that doesn't mean a position within a hierarchy. It means that our role as staff is to lead and to push and make sure that we're having just practices and policies in place to make sure that our students are finding success on our campuses. Whatever that looks like for them, I have my own definition, but it's whatever it looks like for them. We need to be accountable for our actions. And just like with the statistics, those need to be presented, those need to be out there, because otherwise, when we go back to normal, I'm scared of what that normal is going to look like. And I'm very confident that if I'm scared of it, our Black students and our Black peers will also be even more terrified of what that normal looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think looking at like I always say my core RLC group, we've had a lot of conversations about privilege, especially. We have a very high number of white females. And so acknowledging the privilege and the ability to disconnect from social issues, because a lot of the time, especially when it comes to police, white women are the safest entity. You're less likely to be arrested, you're less likely to be stopped. And so finding how to be able to utilize your privilege in a positive way while supporting our coworkers of color and checking in on them individually and making sure that we're acknowledging that we're standing with you and that there's no place for this at our institution, and that it's sometimes easier for white women to get away with pushing for these changes, and that we know that whether we think that's fair or not, if you know of issues that you don't feel comfortable bringing forward, to let us know and to let us help you, because we can't always see that. Even within our different communities, I work within Sorority Village, which is heavily white because we have 8 CPC chapters and 2 NPHC chapter houses. So finding the ways that we're promoting diversity in areas that we may not be able to technically diversify as much because we don't really control Greek life. So breaking down those institutional barriers and giving people space to have these conversations and educate themselves and be allies that are doing the emotional labor, because it is not on our minoritized individuals to have to invest that emotional labor. It should never be, not in the age of Google, not in the age of all of us are coming in knowing this exists. And having our students, especially who are coming from rural Mississippi, have these conversations early, and finding a time to say that, ignorance isn't an acceptable excuse anymore. And just because you're ignorant to these issues doesn't mean that we're going to allow them to continue and perpetuate on our campuses, because our students of color deserve better than that. And most of our campuses don't fly the state flag, but that doesn't mean that the state flag doesn't exist. And so finding ways to come together and support our students. And it's seen in athletics. All of our athletic teams met at the Capitol and definitely didn't social distance correctly a couple days ago, but they did it. So good for them. But finding those ways to use our privilege and use the driving force of we're an athletic state. Let's let athletics push this positive change. So using that privilege in a positive way and making those relationships with people that you didn't think you were going to make relationships with in the first place.
That's good. Does anybody else have anything on to that question? No, and I think that's really good, and a lot of what we're kind of erring on the side of, right, is some of those things that are noticeable that are hidden when we think about barriers, right? And I even think about so that kind of leads into our next question, is what I'm going to say, is that what are right? What are some of those noticeable and hidden barriers, right? You might think about, right, the Department of Culture. You might think about some of those psychological barriers, right? Things that we know and operate against social justice advocacy in housing and residence life, and pretty much influence the work that we do. And so we want to engage in a discussion about what are some of those noticeable and hidden barriers? How have you seen them operate on your campus? And again, how does it kind of go back to some of our other questions about the change you'd want to see and things of that nature? So again, I'll turn to our panelists.
So campus ecology is like a passion of mine, which is great for this conversation. I think we have to acknowledge that higher education as a whole is rooted in white, male, wealthy, cisgenderism. And so whether we want to say we're progressive or not, we have to acknowledge that our roots start in a lot of prejudice, and they still exist to this day. So for our students of color, when we talk about things like professionalism and how white women can get away with doing whatever they want to their hair and it's still professional, but my coworker of color can show up with braids and have a conversation. So having those conversations about breaking down what higher ed was built as is important, because the institutional barriers for our students, especially our first gen students of color, are exorbitantly larger than our white students of color. Wow, white first gen students is what I meant to say there, because there's this never ending institutional barriers of, I have no idea what I'm doing. And at some campuses, USM included, it's like you have to go to the registrar for this, but business services for this, but financial aid for this. And you don't even know half these departments exist until you get sent to them. And you're like, I'm so lost. Someone help me. And we don't give our students that support. And so it's finding those ways to talk about it in a positive, safe manner, while also acknowledging the fact that we have these institutional barriers. And they will be here because higher ed as a whole is rooted in meritocracy. And it's not going to go away even if we want to pretend we're progressive.
So the University of Mississippi is a predominantly freshman serving campus, which means our challenge of having these conversations means that ideally we would open minds and open hearts, but we're fighting against 18 plus years of their lived experiences, plus 400 years of their family's systemic lens. And so I think that's one of the barriers that we face, is that we don't have a longitudinal time with our students. We do offer upperclassmen housing, and the staff teams out in our apartments do a fantastic job of continuing to engage in that way. But on a campus where we can house up to 5,500, 4,700 of which would be freshmen, we can't have that long-term change. We're also a self-selecting, like, you place yourself in your room campus, which means that we have to fight against perceptions that to live in this building means that you are like a top tier student and you're going to go Greek and you're going to do all of these things. We have to fight that, because what ends up happening is we have, majority does not cover it, but vast majority white buildings, and the students are self-selecting in these spaces. And so I think those are barriers that we face, where our time is limited. The students may not be open to hearing it, and they didn't come to the University of Mississippi necessarily to leave more woke than they got here. And that's a fact. A lot of our students, that's what they say is, I came here for the Southern experience, particularly our out-of-state students. I'm like, what Southern experience you come here for, fam? Like, I got many questions. But I think those are barriers that we face. I also think that as staff in an at-will state, we don't want to push the barrier, and we don't want to push the envelope, because if somebody's rocking the boat too much, you know, what's going to happen? I can't imagine that would happen, but it is not out of the legal question. So I think there's a lot of issues that we have to navigate.
Yeah, yeah, and to your point, and I'll say this, and we'll continue with other responses, but running that fine line as a professional, right? For me, it's an entry-level professional. I think for a large conglomerate of us, it's like really balancing. Entry-level professionals also tend to be, depending on where you are, we tend to quantify the department, yet we are at the entry level. And so what does advocacy look like? While we may have quote unquote numbers, right? Like, and I might have a support system, right? I might have, 8 or 9 other colleagues of mine on the same level to back me up in the things that we believe in, and we might all believe in the same thing. However, we also know what influence and also what things could come, I hate to put it this way, but what things could come down on us, right? Like if we were to so choose to say this or post this or do this. So that's just a good thought there. And yeah, I'll yield. Anyone have anything else back to the question as well, just talking about those noticeable and hidden barriers?
I think a pretty noticeable barrier is representation. A lot of times you see, from every experience I've had so far, I have always seen a male director and a female associate director, or even then a male associate director and then female. Like it's a man would always be in that position above a woman. And so like that gender like stereotype of putting them up there, like it just, I've always seen that implemented in a housing department that I've worked for. And so working at Mississippi State, where I have a female director and a male associate director, it is very interesting to me where I can see like some of that shift of that culture. It looks different. The communication looks entirely different, as well as the departments I've always worked at as well. Those directors and associate directors have always been white, where I now work with a lot more African American, Black coworkers. And I really have been challenged in that sense of, okay, I don't know all these things that maybe I have said before that are implicitly racist or things like that, and making sure that I'm educating myself, because it is not the job of my coworkers to educate me. It is my job to go out there and be educated so that I can be that educated resource for my students as well. But I think about representation a lot because I am an openly bisexual male. And so not a whole lot of that representation going on here in Mississippi from multiple levels. So like, it's just, I think representation is super important because it makes you think about how long can I be in a place where I'm the only one. And so like, that can be a very difficult thing to try and try and deal with. And then if you're not at somewhere long enough, are you there long enough to make change? And then it just, a lot of those things come into play when representation is not there. It affects a lot of things. It affects people's morale, those shared identities. When you're coming in, can you make that connection fast? Because I generally do relate better to people in the queer community because they do understand some of the things that I deal with as a queer person. And it's not because like an ally won't understand, but it's because they don't have to worry walking down the street that I'm holding this other man's hand. I don't have to I have to, every time a car passes me, I flinch. Like that happens. And like, I think that people knowing those same struggles above me makes me feel better when they're supervising me, because I can know that they feel some of those shared experiences that I have.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. Just a saying, coming from a, like I said, a predominantly Black institution, I think sometimes we often have to remember that with our African American students is that from some of the places they come from, they're really suffering from like college. And so the thing is, when I go to college, I can create this newness of myself. No one really knows me here. I can just go off and be free. And so say, for instance, I'm coming from the LGBT community. Maybe at home I wasn't accepted, and then I come here with the newness, but then I'm surrounded by the attacks that's around me, because maybe I get to an institution where maybe that's not as accepted. And especially coming to Mississippi schools, maybe you're coming from up north or the East Coast where it's kind of okay. But then you come to the South and it's not okay. So being an African American person and you're targeted with being Black, you're targeted with identifying with the community. It's almost as if I think a little more mental health needs to come into play when our African American students come to campus, because I always say this every year as a director, we take on every problem that they have, and we don't even know that some of these problems are occurring. So when they come to school and maybe they lash out at certain things or maybe not receptive to certain stuff that's going on, we have to stop and start to think like, we don't know where they're coming from. So we get all of these students in Mississippi, but I think sometimes as Mississippi, we don't understand that we take on every other state's problems. And when I say every other state's problems, maybe they dealt with a different type of issue there, and now they have it here. And what we're not really very receptive of anything at times, and it makes it harder on all of us. And I think as a higher educated person and educating young people, I think our mental health has to play a big part. And sometimes I wish maybe the higher ed would offer us more of a mental stability to really deal with some of the things that we're walking into. Because I think as hall directors, sometimes they think like, okay, well, you don't really have to do much. But when they're having problems, we take on all of that. And I don't think a lot of different departments get it, that we take on everything. Yes, maybe they go to Greek life and student life and this, that, and the third, but housing gets the bulk of everything. So that's just my perspective on it.
Can I build on, I'm sorry, Billy? Yes? Yes, okay. And Abrielle, yes, okay. Something that both of you said like really like sparked something for me. When we're talking about representation within our staffing, we need to make sure, I think, that we're not, we need to push our leadership to make sure that we're not being resorted to tokenism. Like that doesn't become what happens. As a very open gay man, like it is my biggest fear that I'm always the like diversity guy, because if we don't have any people of color, it's like you're the closest one to like, here you go, or like being appointed to these different things and that sort of stuff. And so I think making sure that diversifying our staff is great. That's something that for me during my time here at the university, I've prided myself on. When I've been the chair of a training and selection committee, we have increased the diversity, but we have also at the same time increased the diversity, equity, and inclusion training of who those people report to. And I think that is so important, because otherwise, if we're only bringing in marginalized voices and saying like, look how diverse we are, guys, like, but we're not actually supporting them, we're not actually there with and for our students and staff, we've done nothing but a complete disservice to those people that we hired or worked with or whatever, because we have used their emotional, social, and psychological labor to make ourselves feel better. So yeah, I fully agree. I think representation absolutely matters. And I would very much like to see us as a state, and I don't know if the departments are doing this. I don't feel like we at the University of Mississippi are doing this, but I would imagine other units within higher education within the state may feel that way. If there is one Black staff member and they're like, oh, somebody came to me and they were talking about like a protest and I didn't understand, so like, go talk to him, go talk to her. That should be an opportunity for us to educate and say like, no, I don't know either. So let's learn together. Let's work through it together and actually have representation matter. So that sparked it. So thank you both. Appreciate it.
No, yeah, I think that's really good, and it ingrains from just looking at some of the responses from the question is it makes you think about, okay, realistically speaking, and for those who do like curriculum work, right? It's like how long will we have the student, right? So like 1 year to 2 years, 1 to 3 maybe. one to like till they graduate, rare, right? And then right, and you also think about in the different contexts that we all serve within, majority PWIs, but also we have HBCUs in the state, right, that are represented, and also our community colleges, right? So in that context, 1 to 2, maybe 1, that's all you got, right? And so I think that's also felt across, and then just ingraining that idea of the representation. And it really, so from the conversation pertaining to representation, and then also speaking, I think Aubrielle brought up the point of thinking about where our students are coming from. Just want to lead into the next question, kind of merging two questions together, of what changes do we anticipate surrounding education for our incoming residents in the fall? And also think of that in the lens of allyship in today's climate, right? So allyship, not only for yourselves, but then how do we educate our students with allyship, right? And so we've already brought up how, I think it was Ben or others as well, who said, I'm not here, I'm here for the Southern traditional college experience. My mom and dad went to Ole Miss, Mississippi State, that's what I'm here for, right? And so what changes do we anticipate surrounding educating those incoming residents and those who are returning? And how might that kind of go along the lines of allyship, again, for yourselves and us as professionals, but also with our student staff and our residents in our halls. And then into that, the last thing I'll add, not that I've added enough, is just how might that be perceived from our marginalized groups, right? In your opinion. So I'll leave it there.
Oh, that's a big question. I can personally say, in light of everything that's going on and the students getting ready to return back to campuses and college, social media has made a major impact on a lot of outlooks. So, with me being at an HBCU, my heart goes out to the more diverse schools at this point. And I say that because a lot of things have came from under the rug over these last couple of months, a lot of outlooks, and some of the people are wearing the very same shirts that, that support the schools that you may work at. And so when you, as a freshman, you see this online and you see someone's opinion and they say, oh, well, I do this for this school and I feel this way and I stand firmly on it, it could kind of make you uncomfortable. So I foresee some students coming in, their guard is going to be up. And so I think the challenge is just going to be allowing them to feel comfortable when they get there. Because everything that we've seen for the last couple of months, people have really shown their true colors. And I think one of the best parts about the HBCU is that you get to come and you get to be a little bit okay, even though that this is going on social media. But I do have friends that are at other institutions where it's very diverse. And some of their worry is how am I going to look towards them? Because when you have some of these people, even on the news sites, they're just saying whatever they feel. And I think that that's going to be a lot of the challenge coming into this new semester, dealing with COVID and a lot of schools not being able to have as many activities. And really, social media is going to be the only thing accessible to them at their thumbs. So if we can't have a lot of student activities, we can't have big meetings, all of your feelings are going to come out from social media. Everybody's going to be in their room a lot more. So it's a lot of things that's going to be harvesting. So I just really look for ways for everybody to kind of get them involved in light of this situation, because I think this with COVID has brought a lot of things out of a lot of people. And so I know it's going to be challenging for you guys, definitely going into the newness of what we have going on, because I can't say we're returning back to normal. We're going into a newness of the school year. And so, it's going to be challenging. And I think even for us as HBCU, it's going to be very challenging dealing with, some of the things that the students deal with. They're coming from the communities who just had protests. Maybe they were there when the buildings and everything else were burning down. So like I said before, we're getting ready to get all of that. And I think this is going to be one challenging year for us all, because they're getting ready to bring us everything that we saw for the last 3 months via social media.
Yeah, I believe fully in transparency. I am terrified of what the fall is going to look like at times. We have a global pandemic, and looking at the statistics, our students' age group are the ones where the cases are spiking. Our institution hit CNN we do it fairly regularly, but we hit CNN because we had rush parties over the summer. We had students who were like, you know what, I'm not worried about social distancing. It's really only impacting my parents or my grandparents, etc. Surprise, it's not. So I'm worried about what that's going to look like. As hall directors, when these students come back, they're coming into our homes. I joke a lot that I run one of the largest Airbnbs in Oxford. They're all coming back. And so, you know, thinking about how we're enforcing masks, all of those things. We also, not surprising to anybody, have a major election coming up. We have the 2020 presidential election. That's going to be a lot. We have our state athletics leaders working with our state political leaders to change the Mississippi state flag. We're having conversations about Confederate statues. We're having all of these things all happening at once. And Aubrielle, I think you hit the nail on the head of many issues are arriving on our campus whenever we open back up in August. I think for me, what that is going to change is the way that I implement our residential curriculum. When we talk about, you know, discuss how your actions impact others, you not wearing your mask does not hurt you, it hurts others. When you choose to post ist stuff, whatever the ist prefix is, stuff, it doesn't impact you, it impacts others. Can impact you, but you get what I'm saying. And so I think having those conversations and building in that civility, civil discourse is a skill that I don't think our generation has. I think that our students are so quick to cancel someone that we can't use restorative practices to bring them back into the fold and engage in a conversation. It leads to greater polarization on these issues when it doesn't have to be that. So I think looking at ways to reach out and to engage. I think the other piece is that we as staff all get it. It sounds like we all get it. Like we're on, if not the same page, we're at least in the same chapter of the same book. But our students aren't. And so if we are so aggressive in our outreach to students, my fear is that we will turn those students off from the message, further isolating them. And I think that that's one of the things that I've appreciated about working at the university is we use restorative practices in everything it is that we do. Now, sometimes the harm cannot be repaired aside from removing someone from the community. And that's okay. That's repairing the harm. But engaging in that way and role modeling appropriate discourse and appropriate relationship building, I think is going to be one of the ways that we can navigate this newness, whatever the hell the newness looks like. Yeah.
I would also add the thing, I don't know about anyone else, but Mississippi State is having a condensed semester. So everything is going to be fast-paced. So all these fun topics that we get to deal with are just going to come hurtling at us so fast, and so like there won't be a break like there usually is. And I think what's really important for us as professionals is like meeting them where they're at and not adding to that chaoticness. Like we can try and fast pass and like make everything super fast for them and try and like, all right, now understand this. Okay, you don't have a full grasp on that yet. Okay, let's introduce this more advanced concept. You don't know what identity is? Let's talk about intersectionality. So like it's just, we have to slow down, let them take in this material, take in this growth so that the growth is long lasting versus short impact. So they can take a understanding of identity and not just, that's race. Identity is a variety of different things. It's religion, it's sexual orientation, it's gender expression, and all of these things. So like you can take the time to have them apply it to multiple things. So it's much more long lasting and the effect has bigger implements. So I think like really challenging ourselves as professionals to just slow down. And if the growth isn't seen right away, that's okay, because they're processing it and allowing them to process that with the short time we have, and just reminding ourselves that like it's okay for us to process things too, and to take that time for ourselves, because it's a shorter time, but it's a lot more, which can create burnout. So that's one of the things that like I often challenge myself with, as well as my coworkers. Setting boundaries for yourself, going home at 5 p.m. or trying 5 p.m. Like, I understand you have all council meetings at 9 or things like that, but there should be nothing happening at, I don't know, 12 o'clock at night. You know what I'm saying? Like, and just going to sleep, taking your time for yourself, and like remembering that you have a life outside this work, so that you can come back to this work and be at 100%. So really just to everyone in our whole field, the students, us, our grads, our everyone, relax, take a second and breathe, because it's going to be fast, but if we just slow down, things will be okay.
I think we are all acknowledging our students are coming back with more trauma than probably ever before. And we're also doing things that are potentially adding more trauma on it. Like, first week of August, we're having sorority recruitment, and it's not completely virtual, which makes no sense. You know, diseases, haha, fun. Great time for me in the village here. Well, my face, exactly. But acknowledging that we have to like teach our students how to advocate for themselves and how to be allies in a way that isn't performative, and ourselves included. I think every institution's go-to is, let's have a conversation. Let's make a plan. We'll plan to plan. And then how far do we get in the action plan? Let's be real, we barely get past the starting line. And so that teaching our students how to be allies, especially within intersectionality, unfortunately, and that requires a lot of us professionals to be honest and talk about our own minoritized identities and tell our staffs, hi, I'm Meg. I am a bisexual married person with an invisible disability. And so it's finding that idea of how to use your privileges that you do or do not have, and admit that, yeah, you're going to get tired. Ally burnout is not really a thing. You don't get to get tired of being an ally. And you have to understand that, like, yeah, mental health may be in the gutter, but it's a lot easier to say, I can step back because this doesn't physically affect me. I don't have to worry about being 1 in 1,000 Black men that may be killed by a cop. I don't have to worry if I'm going to get stopped at a traffic stop that I'm going to be arrested. So it's a lot easier to say, oh, for my mental health, I'm stepping back. But are you still perpetuating those issues by not acknowledging the privilege you have to step back? Because that's a large issue with our students is they're posting those black squares for Blackout Tuesday, and then crickets. And where are we going from there? Because we have to acknowledge that that's not enough anymore. Because if we'd had these conversations multiple years ago, we may not be in this situation in the middle of a global pandemic with murder hornets that just disappeared out of nowhere.
Yeah, and that's so good. I mean, just a lot of just good things to take away, and to add to just in as people were sharing, just reflecting on the fact that, again, to Aubrielle just stating and others have shared, yeah, our students are coming back, right? Like, we all have our movement, like we call it moving in MSU, others call it like moving day, and you might have your own coined term. Regardless, the students are coming back, and they're bringing everything. I think Aubrielle said they're bringing everything that we have gotten to see, either lived or primarily seen via social media. And to those points, it's just, I don't know about you all, but there's a new aspect, not a new aspect, right? There's just a more intense feeling of restlessness and tiredness amongst our students, and especially amongst our African-American students. And that's coming, right? And so, and just thinking about that, and just knowing that, like, whether we want to hide behind, this idea of allyship burnout, like Meg had mentioned, or if we want to hide behind whatever, allyship doesn't end from a post that just says Blackout Tuesday, have a nice day, right? And so those are just good things. And one of our last questions, and just question via a statement, or I call it kind of a call to action per se, but Billy kind of already started us down this track in just saying it's going to be okay, take it slow. And so my question is really, what calls to actions would you charge towards professionals, right, at any level in housing related to the discussion today? So so in that, just thinking about those final thoughts from the discussion, but really, again, those calls to actions that you would charge towards our fellow colleagues, our leadership, just in light of our discussion on today. And we'll end it there. So whoever wants to get us started.
I think my call to action towards my leadership at my university, like I said, with the generation barriers, my call to action is for them to get prepared and understand what's going on. I think that when I say the generation miscommunication, I think they know what's going on, but I think, and I hate to say it like this, but I think they've reached a level of success to the point it's like, certain things don't bother me anymore. I've accomplished this. I don't have to necessarily fight anymore. I'm nearing retirement. I don't necessarily have to do this, but y'all, there are leaders, and I need them to lead in this season that we're walking in, instead of not being the voice at all. No matter where you are, I think we're in a point in our country where we just need real, raw leadership. No matter how old you are, what age you are, what level of success you've reached, we really need direction. And I think the state of Mississippi as a whole needs some direction. Because I saw this post on Facebook, and it was like, don't ask your teacher friends how the August is going to look. We don't know. And I really felt that way about higher education, because we don't know. We have these plans, as she stated, we got these plans, we don't really execute them. We get there and it just kind of stops. So my call to the leadership is, even if you can't make a full plan, let's start with step one. Let's do step one. Let's get through step one and keep going until we can achieve what we need to achieve. But I think right now, my biggest call to them is, if you're in a leadership position, just lead, because we can't bring students back and we don't have leadership at all, or everybody's kind of just sitting back twiddling their thumbs like, oh, well, this doesn't affect me. Yes, it does, because they're at the top. And so we can't advocate where they're at, because that's what they're paid to do. So I can't walk into a president's meeting and say, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z. I just kind of need them to get in tune with reality and deal with the reality that we have, because it's a very short semester. Like someone said, it's very, very short. So I think in this short semester, I don't know if we got to go month by month to get through to the next month, but something has to happen. Because if we don't, it could be very, very hard, especially with the election in November, and we're condensing down a semester. I don't want November. It feels like we're playing a game of Jumanji, and I'm just like, I'm scared that November is just going to be just through the roof. And that's when we have to get them to go home. And I'm like, I don't want to, in the midst of us getting them to go home, the buildings are torn down because they are upset of whatever the outcomes may be in them. So just a call to action for the leadership.
I completely agree with that. And I would love to build on and say, stop being reactive. Like, we know these things are happening. We know racism exists. We know all of these other problems are things. Stop waiting for things to happen to our campus to do things. And because it's so frustrating to all of our students with minoritized identities to only hear support after something traumatic happens. It's so frustrating to hear, well, in our diversity statement, you don't have to worry about being fired because you're LGBTQ, even though they're trying to repeal that. Like, no, you should be on the front end protecting our students and making these environments better, because that's what we're here for. That's what we do not get paid a lot to do, but we still get paid something to do. And so instead of having these conversations after the fact, finding ways to, you don't have to make the whole plan, like she said, but have plans, make a stance, and hold yourself to it. Be accountable. Don't just be like, this is the way it's always been. We're in the South. We're prejudiced. No, that's not the way I want my South to be. That I've gone to Ole Miss. I'm an example of what happens when you let people live on campus all 4 years. Is you get people that know it's not okay. And that was just lucky. Shout out to Campus Walk. But you stop accepting that reactivity is okay. That's all I can say.
I love the shout out to Campus Walk because Jillian in the call is the community coordinator for Campus Walk. So yeah, good job. I think for me, it's a case of like, I want our leaders to lead, but I also want our leaders to practice accountability. One of the things that I asked my assistant director to do and to advocate for is when this plan for opening and the fall and whatever the hell else is coming. Sorry, I cuss a lot. I've been really good so far. Whenever the plan for everything else rolls out, I would like the leadership of our department to sit down and explain this is the rationale. Not so that I can critique it. I have a lot of feedback on a lot of things no one ever asked me for, but that's fine. I just want to know where they're coming from so that I can have confidence and I can know concretely that our leadership has our back. And that's one of the things that, he said, I think that's an excellent idea and I'm going to ask about it. Great. Ask about it. I will keep hounding you until you tell me that they flat out said no, and then I'm going to find someone else to keep hounding about it. But I just want to know. Because at some point, these things are going to happen at some scale, large or small, again. And as we move up in our careers, I think it's so important for us to understand the framework from which they're working from. Our director, as the city of Oxford was on like super hyper lockdown mode, and the university was on like super hyper down lockdown mode. It was shared like the booklet or whatever that he was using. I was like, that's great. Like now I know what sort of check marks and progress points you're looking for and you and the leadership are looking for in us moving forward. Well, now, how are we supposed to do full occupancy in the fall? What is going to happen when one student contracts COVID? Are we putting an entire building on lockdown? Like, what does that look like? And for me, my anxiety manifests in not knowing things. So that's helpful. But I think accountability. If we don't get something right, I think we need to make amends for it. If we make a misstep or mistake, I think we as leaders and our leadership above us need to be accountable and say, yes, I messed up, we messed up, they messed up. I don't care who messed up. This is how we move forward. But I also agree, we need to be proactive. We know that these things are happening, and a large impassioned statement by leadership is fine without concrete steps. That statement means nothing. That statement, all it says is like, we were mad that this happened and we will be mad when it happens again. Like that's not helpful to anybody. So I think just leading, accountability, transparency, that is my call to action. That's something I intend to do with my grad assistant in the fall, my student staff. That is how I plan on running my little section of campus, is being as transparent as I can. So I've taken up enough time. I'm gonna be quiet. Thanks.
I think I would say my call to action is just having our upper leadership, just not even just at Mississippi State, but I think in the state of Mississippi, thinking about what areas of privilege do majority of our professionals have, and how do those areas, what policies and practices do we have that empower those areas of privilege, and like how do we try and break down those policies and revamp them to be more empowering to all students. Just because I think we do have a lot of policies as a state / like Mississippi State that do inherently benefit certain students way more than other students. And so I think just taking the time to do a strategic plan of these are the policies that we have identified that inherently like empower privileged areas, as well as I'm trying to think of the word, disempower, I guess, the opposite. They oppress, there's the word, yeah. They oppress other students. And so like making sure that they are then breaking down those policies and seeing how they can revamp them and make them different so that they empower all students. And so I think that's a realistic expectation to ask of them, that when a policy no longer suits all of the students, it is looked at and changed to help benefit the students moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we kind of unplug here for today, is just thinking of all these calls of actions. Of course, we made reference to our leadership, and not just leadership in our departments, but leadership at our university level and leadership at the state level, right? And arguably the national level, but really in consideration that we are a MAHO organization, just really just good to hear, and in hopes as people tune into this this discussion on today, that people can pull away from these calls of actions, again, at various levels. And I think our lovely panelists just really touched on and even been attributed, like, this is what I'm gonna do with my slice of the pie, right? And so just taking those away, and I think there's a lot of things, and especially in light of the different contexts that we all work within, right? So going back to community colleges, HBCUs, and PWIs that are represented across the state, I think we can all take away from those calls of action. So with that, we are at time, but we just like to, on behalf of the MAHO committee and the Diversity and Inclusion committee, we just want to thank everyone for just being a part of the discussion today, and definitely do not want this discussion to stop here. Definitely want to encourage the conversation to continue, right? So this is not even a stepping stone, because I think that this is just a form of reflection and expression from a lot of the things that we have all felt, seen, and have experienced for some of us years, right? And for others, it might have been going into the year 2020 and getting smacked in the face, and that's okay. And so just wanted to encourage that these discussions continue at of course, our representative institutions, but even throughout. And even also taking it home, I think someone also expressed, taking that home with you, right? And putting that into your own walk of life and how you ingrain that into who you are, not just in the work context, but also as your role as a person in this world. So thank you again so much. We just have an awesome panel here today who just really just provide a really nice and robust discussion on today. So we just want to thank you all so much again on behalf of MAHO, and thank you to our MAHO organization for allowing us to host this discussion as well. Again, definitely want to encourage that this discussion continues, and also be on the lookout for other opportunities that may be presented as well to continue that conversation. And then lastly, we want to encourage that we continue in this environment of sharing. And so hopefully you might have listened to, we have people from Ole Miss, Southern Miss, Jackson State, right? And so, but we also have a lot of different institutions that make up who we are. And so definitely hope that this conversation encourages those who tune in to reach out to our different organizations and institutions that make up our lovely state, and to do that and let this, hopefully this discussion propel you to do so. So again, thank you all so much again. Wish you well as we segue into training. Definitely want to just leave everybody with be safe. And definitely thank you all again. So with that, we will unplug, and y'all have a great rest of your day. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you all.
See y'all.